Hey, this is Sanyam Bhutani, and you're listening to Chai Time Data Science, a podcast for data science enthusiasts where I interview practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers about their journey, experience, and talk all things about data science.
Hello and welcome to Quarantine Content with Chai, the CTDS.Show. In this episode, I interview another legend from Kaggle, Dmitry Larko, Chief Data Scientist at SEO.ai. We talk a lot about Dmitry's journey and how his views on Kaggle have evolved over the few years. He's been active on Kaggle for the past 6 or 7 years, and we discuss how his journey and his learnings and his takeaways from Kaggle and his overview of the platform have evolved, along with the tasks that he works on during the day outside of Kaggle. He also Kaggles during the day. We discuss his role at S2O.ai. Note, we both are biased. We both work at S2O.ai, but this podcast is just an independent conversation between the two of us. And we also discuss about H2O's products and the challenges that Dmitry is undertaking at work. I believe this conversation has a lot of advices for Kaggle. The biggest one for me is, and the biggest one that I'd like to highlight is, if you stay persistent and if you keep learning, even from the losses you set up to make a win, and it's an iterative process and you can keep learning on Kaggle throughout your years. Another one is, don't be scared to make the jump on Kaggle. It's always scary, but once you get involved in the process, not just of Kaggle or even in data science, broadly speaking, there's a lot of learning to be done. With these two wise advices from Dmitry, here's the complete conversation. Please enjoy the show. Hi everyone, it's an honor for me to be talking to Dmitry Larko, the legend from Kaggle. Dmitry, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me here. Actually, it's a pleasure.
Really excited to be talking to you. I want to start by a silly question, if I may. I've met so many Dimitrys, and all of them are great on Kaggle. Is that a cheat code? Is that a secret to being great on Kaggle?
Well, I mean, if you want a serious answer on this question, I think at the moment of my birthday and like around 1980s and 19s, it was a quite popular name in Eastern Europe, Dmitry. So there's a tons of there's a lot of Dmitrys basically being born at that moment, and a lot of babies being named Dmitrys basically. And yeah, that's why you have a lot of population, and some of them actually being great on Kaggle as well, right? Just by a pure chance. I don't think it's actually related to the name, right? Yeah, but I know it's like a silly question, but I think this question actually requires a serious answer, all right? Because I don't think participating on Kaggle requires you to have a specific, like something that nobody else has, right? Like some like a specific skill, basically. No, it's not. It's mostly it's mostly through constant work, right? So especially if you compete in competition, that means you have to compete from the beginning to the end. As soon as you start competing, you end up competing only after the competition ends. It's not like, like, hey, I made a submission like 2 months before the competition ends and I'm done. No, I mean, obviously somebody will build a better solution for you, a better solution compared to your solution. So you just have to be, always constantly present and try different ideas over and over again, right? So it's I think if you ask me to describe Kaggle using a single word, this word gonna be persistence, right? So you just have to be persistent, just doing until the end. And I believe actually this can be true for a lot of, it actually can be a part of the formula of human success in any type of activity, right? It's just like, you just do it until you make it, basically, right? And that's hard. That's really hard, but it's I don't have any other recipes how to do that, right? Just do it.
Certainly, we'll talk more about that. But another thing I wanted to point out is Dmitry name. The name is synonymous to someone who's from Russia, and at least through the movie culture, we know that Russians are great at math and programming. Do you also think that's a benefit to you on Kaggle?
I never was good at math, honestly. So it's well, I do have my major actually is in analysis, statistics, and machine learning. So obviously it helped a lot. But again, it's been a while from I actually had a huge gap between my education and the time I actually start to apply the knowledge or like machine learning basically in Kaggle or like in real life on Kaggle in real life. So that means it's not necessary to have a specific education. Basically, you still can learn actually, especially right these days. You have tons of resources available online. So it's a what was the question? I kind of lost myself.
Did your so Russians are known
Yes.
to be great at programming? Yeah.
Yes. Russians maybe, but again, I cannot speak for the whole nation. Yes, we do have a lot of bright people. I'm just thinking I'm not part of them actually. We do have a strong education in math and physics, right? But to me, math was actually always like kind of arcane knowledge, basically, right? So stats actually, I feel myself better, in statistics compared to like math in general. But still, I never thought of myself as a really good in math person. It's more like I know how to use this knowledge I have and the tools I have in a practical life scenarios, like in on practice.
Got it. So you mentioned you had transitioned a little while after completing your studies, and I researched this a bit through your, I think, LinkedIn. I found out that you transitioned into a data science role in 2015, and you had won your first medal in Kaggle around 2013 or 2014. Why did you decide to transition into this field?
So it's a long story of being very humble and a long story of being like it's basically a story of fear, right? Because I actually was afraid to switch it. So it started actually for me. It started in around 2012. So I learned about Cargill in like November 2012, something about that, right? So at the end of the 2012, from my dad actually, who is a quite good in Kaggle. So he learned about Kaggle way before me. I think he competed like a year or two before I actually heard about Kaggle from him. So, and I like the idea immediately, right? So because you have it's exactly what I would like to do, right? But I was actually afraid to compete immediately. So I spent basically 6 months after that I learned about the Kaggle, just trying to learn R because I had no idea about R before that, right? And refresh my knowledge in statistics and machine learning. And after 6 months, I finally decided to join. Still was extremely afraid of, join. Actually, my head was shaking while I'm doing my first submission. But you know what? In the next month, I learned about machine learning like 10 times more compared to my previous 6 months, and I prepare myself to Kaggle because, Kaggle really motivates you to learn tons of stuff in a fraction of seconds, basically.
Yeah.
So in a very fast pace. And yeah, that's actually interesting insight, so don't hesitate to compete, just start to compete, especially if you really want to. For me, I actually was afraid to start competing on Kaggle because I was like, but in your first competition, there is nothing to lose actually, right? It's just like, okay, you can compete. Nobody knows you, right? That's fine. If you lose, you will learn tons of stuff. If you win, well, everybody will learn about you, which is actually already good, right? So there's a tons of things you can actually achieve, right, without almost nothing to lose, right? Yeah. And that was my motivation to start the first competition, and I started it. And to me, actually, my first competition was actually extremely successful. I ended up in a 10th place and that was the biggest competition at the moment on the platform. It was like a 1,600 people participants. Actually, it was quite huge. and I was in 10th place, right? So,
Yeah.
and I never thought of myself as a data scientist or machine learning expert. Actually, before that moment, I was like, oh my god, I can do that. And obviously, I got stuck to Kaggle immediately.
Was that the reason of you getting addicted to it? I think addiction would be the right word.
Yeah, addiction was it was exactly the right word. Yes and no. I still kind of like to believe I was actually, just like doing this stuff, not just like winning. But maybe it was definitely a big part of the question to get, immediately stuck to the Kaggle. Because I know, like, for example, for Marius, who is very well known on Kaggle as Casanova, basically, he actually lost his competition. That's the very same competition. I was on 10th place. He was like on 100 something. So but for him, it actually was that's something that motivates him to continue, actually, right? And honestly, because Kaggle is more like a marathon, right? You have to spend several months competing in competition. It does require a lot of motivation. So it's very important to be in the right psychological state, basically, right? And for example, for myself, back in the days, I'm trying to put myself back in these shoes and answer the question, what would happen if I won't be in a 10th place in this competition? Would I continue actually competing on Kaggle? That's actually a very tough question to answer. But my second competition actually wasn't that successful compared to the first one. I was like in the 13th place, right? So, okay. And yeah, back to my story. After my first competition, I reached out to some of the seniors people in my company, asking them, what, guys, looks like I can do that, right? Like it seems like I really can do something. Maybe it's a good idea for me to transition from a data warehousing role I actually doing that now to the data science role, because it feels like a more interesting job to do, because I was already extremely bored with the data warehousing. There is no actually, for me at that moment, there weren't any challenges left. So, especially technical challenges. Like I know how to build system, there was obviously tons of different business question that you're building a data warehouse system, but that wasn't something that attracted me at the moment. So, and I decided to switch to data science role because, I had a feeling that there's a tons of data and we know how to store data already, but we have no idea how to extract insights from the data. And the expertise how to tell the story about with your data, how to build models with your data, going to be more and more important, especially like the more data we have, basically. So to remind, it was 2012, so yeah. Hadoop actually was like all around the place. Like everybody talks about Hadoop, and I had no idea what Hadoop is actually. So I actually thought, at that moment, in order to be a data scientist, you have to work with the big data, which is actually not true in most of the cases. You don't have to. I mean, most of the data sets you will face in real life, they're quite small, especially on a modern hardware. They're really small. Like you can fit them in a RAM, basically, right? So yeah. What big data are you talking about? So, but my seniors, right? They listen carefully to my story. Like I say, okay, yeah, competition. You know what? I mean, it's. So basically, they tell me, get the several competition in the first place, and they'll circle back to them. I was like, okay. All right. It was a kind of, not the answer I expect to get, but that's the answer I got. So, and I spent the next year basically competing on Kaggle, plus doing my job during the day. So, I was a data warehouse architect during the day and a Kaggle during the night. Yeah, yes. It was extremely tough period of my life because I sleep most of the time. I sleep like 6 to 5 hours basically. Wow. So yeah, so I basically worked on 2 jobs at the same time, right? I have 8 hours on my standard job, and after I came home, I spent another 6 to 7 hours just building something on Kaggle and like pipelines. Whatever, basically, yeah. And especially because at that moment, most of the competitions were tabular data competitions. You have to spend tons of time basically designing new features. After the year, basically, I found myself in a 20th something position in a national Kaggle leaderboard, like national-wide, like a main user ranking, basically.
Okay.
And plus, I had a Kaggle master badge. There was no Grandmaster badge at that moment. Yes, I'm just, just to emphasize, Master was the toppest one basically, right? And I reached out to my company, to my seniors again, and it was like, and you see, I think it's a what helped me actually, that's the Kaggle became more and more recognizable platform actually. People heard about the Kaggle. And as soon as I mentioned, I'm 20 something out of 100,000 data scientists competing on Kaggle, it's like, oh my God, yeah, you just like, yeah, sure, yeah, we just like immediately promote you to data science position. I was like, okay. Because, I never was actually sure at that moment of time, I wasn't sure I am actually worth something as a data scientist. I'm still a quite humble person, actually. At least I tend to think of myself as a being humble person, but most of the time, actually, it is true. So I do need some more self-awareness, basically, as being an expert, because I don't see myself as an expert. I see a lot of areas I have no idea what to do about, and like a lot of areas I can learn more about. So, and that's how my data science career started. Basically, I was still able to compete on Kaggle, and at the same time, I basically audit different data science projects in my company, share my expertise, train data scientists, things like that, basically. And after that, I decided to, and at some moment of time, I think it was like 4 years ago, I decided to change the company basically. And I met Sri, I met other people at H2.ai. And yes, these guys actually respect, H2, they respect Kaggle actually, and respect achievement on Kaggle. And I was actually the first Grandmaster to be hired by H2.ai. And Sri actually immediately said, like, you know what? I mean, I know you're a Kaggle Grandmaster, right? And that means you do care about Kaggle a lot. And I do not expect you to stop Kaggling, because it wouldn't be impossible, right? I can't say you like, hey, Dmitry, now you actually work for me. Stop doing Kaggle at your day you're doing the working hours, because you're going to do it eventually, right? You're still going to continue that, because that's something that motivates you and drives you. So why don't you just do it officially? So you can actually do it, during your working hours, and even more, you can use the H2 hardware to compete on Kaggle. It was like, and for me, it was immediately like, it's basically at that moment I decided I will join H2. So it was like an
instant decision for you.
Yeah, yes, it was like, yeah, sure, I should work we should work here. And from that moment of time, I worked for H2, and yeah, still compete on Kaggle. But yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to point out that you're still very active to this date.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I'm on my activity on the same level, right? So I actually kind of feel myself I'm slightly moving from Kaggle. At least the amount of time I'm spending on Kaggle competitions remains low compared to the previous involvement. But it's still fun. It's still very fun, and there is a lot of things you can learn on Kaggle. There's tons of things you can. Go ahead.
How have your views and your overview of Kaggle evolved over these years as you've competed throughout these years?
So Kaggle definitely became a more recognizable and respected platform. People these days, I mean, thanks to a company like H2, or thanks to Kaggle itself, right? Thanks to the community, people really start to, recognize the Kaggle achievement as something basically which, as something good, as something that defines you as a data scientist. As of Kaggle in general, basically, I don't think in the core basically of Kaggle remains the same, right? There is nothing changed, like, from, let's say, from a bird view perspective. It's still the same platform. It's still the same idea. Details obviously changed a lot, and you have a new type of competitions, which is actually great, but I wasn't able to participate. But I like, there is a recent competition by Francois Cholet, who's basically, that's a great competition actually, right? It's completely different compared to anything else. Like that's something interesting actually. I'm actually always, there is some rumors basically and some news about Kaggle can be a platform for AI games, right? So you can actually train your small like a gaming bots on Kaggle and compete with them, which is even better, right? That's something that I'd never done before, and that's maybe actually a good opportunity to learn. Reinforcement learning actually might be and I spoke to Anthony actually. He mentioned that they're going to have some reinforcement learning competitions as well. Maybe with a combination of AI bot games or something like that. But yeah, I still see this platform as pretty much the same platform it was like 7 years ago. So yeah, 7 years ago, basically, the time I joined. It's still, extremely open, very competitive environment, but it's still, I mean, that's something actually what still, surprised me a lot. It is a competitive platform, right? People actually competing to each other.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they share a lot of insights about the data. It's like, I mean, sometimes I'm not even sure I would be able to, to be that effective in this competition without somebody basically sharing their insights, because I just use their ideas, combine these minds, and that's basically how I compete these days. You're always just looking to other people's solutions and just make them better with your ideas, and that's it. But it's surprisingly, sometimes you read some other people notebook is like is he really doing that? He just basically sure that's awesome, because I never thought about that. Like, because for yourself, you see that immediately as a competitive advantage, right?
Yeah.
If I would, would I share that if I, learn about that? And because, for some people, that's something obvious, right? Like, yeah, I always do that. Like, it's nothing. It's not like a secret magic or secret knowledge. But for you, it actually can be, right? Because it's like, oh my God, yeah, I never thought about that. Like, wow, now I knew that. So and that's something that really, really make Kaggle a unique platform, and really like a platform you can use to learn something like on daily basis.
And if I may say so, even though it's gamified, sharing is gamified, people do enjoy sharing it. And as they call it, it's really the home of data science. Really smart people are always sharing their ideas, and it's also a healthy competitive, even though it's very competitive, but I would say it's a healthy competitive platform.
Yes. Obviously there is some critique on the Kaggle being a competitive platform, because yes, and we have to admit that Kaggle solutions, they are not really practical in most of the cases, and that's fine, right? Because it's a slightly different. Yes, there is some critique about the Kaggle being like a competitive platform, and because of that solution you have as a winning solution, they are not being very like a real life applicable. And that's true, right? Because you just compete to the end, and you just trying to squeeze everything possible from the data. But still, tons of insights you found actually during this competition and while building your models can be helpful for competition sponsor. Besides, you can actually, you can realize what's the theoretical border of information you can extract from the data, the data set, right? You still can actually, if you're a competition sponsor, it still can be useful for you. Even if like, yeah, the final solution is going to be like an ensemble of 1,000 models, and it's going to be, it's never going to end up in the production. It's still a nice way to learn something about the data. Like, for example, how to, let's say if you have a sales, right, how to deal with a cold start. Like, you have a new product, in your sales, and you have no previous historical data to predict the next sales. Is anything possible to do in that case? Like, yeah, well, potentially, yes. You can find the similar products using clustering, and just based on their historical performance, you can start already predicting something. Out of thin air, basically, you can have at least something, which is usually better than nothing. So, and these small insights, actually, yeah, it's a very important insights for the competition sponsor. Unfortunately, in some cases, and that might be a good idea. I mean, there is another platform for competition called Data Driven.
Mm-hmm.
I never actually participated, but from what I heard, in their competitions, you can actually build a final solution yourself. At least it was at the beginning of the platform. I mean, as soon as that was the very first competition they held, and the platform was exactly like that. You just not just win the competition, you also can have an opportunity to build the final pipeline or to help build a production pipeline. And that's actually quite important because, yes, even if you just have basically a single file or several files as a winning solutions, you have to have an expertise what exactly is going to be useful for you and what's not, right? And that's in order to do that, you have to be quite experienced in that, right? And that's not all companies actually have. Experienced data scientists are quite rare these days.
Another practical aspect that many people don't realize comes out of Kaggle is the test of cutting edge research. Machine learning engineers are really drawn to cutting edge research. And if a paper really works, you'll find it in a solution, most probably.
Yes. We have a story about XGBoost, right, being raised thanks to Kaggle, actually, because the author of XGBoost, he promoted on Kaggle, and it was one of the best gradient boosting libraries at that time. So yeah, obviously people immediately starts to using it. Like, it was a no-brainer basically. After the Higgs boson competition, basically, then it was one of the winning solutions, and it was very fast compared to. Yeah, actually, at that moment of time, I think I still use our GBM package, which was not that fast at all. And yeah, after that competition, I immediately switched to Python and started using XGBoost in any other competitions. So yeah, and I think the same happened to several other ideas, right? Like LightGBM, pretty much the same. CatBoost start using Kaggle to promote themselves. RapidCI from NVIDIA, they do exactly the same approach. We just try, because I think it's still the best way to learn how your how your product is behaved, right? Basically on a more or less real life scenario, because you have a data set, you have tons of people who trying different things with your product, with your package, right? And they'll find all mistakes you missed, and they found any algo, let's say, like problem with the algorithms if you have any of them, right? So it's definitely a good platform to, let's say, if you're a researcher of a company who builds a machine learning library, Kaggle is a good platform to test it. And if you, obviously, one of the Kaggle competition participants, you can learn about new package from the Kaggle as well, and try it immediately, right? Not on your data, but in a more or less, secure environment on some other people data, without actually, risking your production pipeline, for example.
That's a great point as well. Now, coming to your team up strategy, I went through your Kaggle profile and realized your 60% of the competitions are just you as a solo team, and you have also won 3 solo gold medals. I hope the audience understands how difficult that is. How do you approach the challenges by yourself versus in a team, and do you see any parallels from there of how you team up with the data science team at work, or when you just the single data scientist working on an idea?
So yeah, actually for this one of these solo medals I actually won because I had a bet with my friend, and we had basically one day we had a chat, and he's like, what, these days is impossible to win a solo gold. Basically, he was like, it's plainly impossible. And I was like, no, it's doable. It's hard, but it's doable. And he said, I bet 10 bottles of wine, actually, you won't be able to do that. I'm like, okay, let's try it. So I won 10 bottles of wine, not just the solo gold medal. So it was kind of, it was a pleasant surprise, because by the end of the day, in some competitions, actually, that's true. Especially for the first places, you can just win by a pure glimpse of luck, basically, right? Pure chance. Because I'm not saying about all competitions, but in some competitions there is definitely not a huge statistically significant difference between the first place and even definitely the second and maybe even the 10th, basically, right? It's sometimes you just more or less pure noise. But it's still it was a valuable win for me and was one of the solo golds. But you're right by saying most of my competitions I participate solo. And that's actually already tells you a lot about my teaming up abilities. I don't know how to team up most of the time, actually, because most of the time I do my competitions alone. But from my teaming up experience, what I can say, for me, and that worked for me and my teammates, we start competing maybe even, like a solo, independent of each other, at least at the start of the competition.
Mm-hmm.
And why it's important, because in that case, you can, first of all, you kind of motivates to learn more about the data yourself, right? Because, nobody helps you to do that, right? You're not relying on anyone else. It's like, I just have to look at the data myself, and I have to build a pipeline myself, and I have to do everything myself. That kind of helps you, to frame the problem inside your head, right? Like in the right way. The second, even more important point, we try to, with my dad actually, we do a couple of competitions, then we immediately team up and share ideas. And we found that in that case, our models become extremely biased. Because we share ideas, we basically repeat ourselves, right? We not try anything else. And if we don't do that, right, our final models becomes unbiased, basically, right? And we can actually, ensemble them together. We can achieve better score. What can be shared actually, especially during the competition, and I'm talking mostly about the tabular data sets competition right now. It's you can share your data sets, not the code, because actually code is very hard to read and understand that, especially if you don't, you can do that, but it will require you a lot of time. It's very much easier just to share the data set, hey, that's my data set. And you're like, hey, that's my data set. And just try to build the different models on using each other data set on all their combination. But that's actually helpful, again, at the middle or close to the end of the competition, because before that you have to just design these data sets, and the less bias you during this design phase, the better actually. The second approach, what we did with in our teams, not just with my dad, but with our participants, we had pretty much the same story, but we have a person who basically spent his time looking through Kaggle discussions, Kaggle kernels, any code, to find something, like insights, ideas, some interesting approaches, right? So he was basically like a scout, basically, right? Searching for the environment for us, and in order to not miss anything, like which other people already shared or already used to them. And that's again was quite helpful. Also, this person actually able to do like a search of research papers, right? So here, like find novel ideas in this domain, or like a standard ideas in this domain. So that could be a nice role actually in for any Kaggle competition, like person who basically just do a research and searches for ideas for the team. For deep learning competitions, like if the competitions like for example for computer vision, I don't have any like a specific strategy yet, but it's the whole field actually is quite it's enormous, basically, right? There is a tons of things you can do with a neural net, like how exactly to train it, what augmentation library to use, what augmentations to use, how to manage my learning rates. Should it be like reducing plateau approach? Should it be like a cosine annealing, basically, or something else, right? There is a tons of things you can do, basically, right? What architecture to use, like how to use it, what layers in my architecture to train, how to represent my data. So there's a that basically requires, in this type of competitions, basically you need to know what you're doing, right? And I would say, to me, it seems like it's very hard to have like unbalanced teammates. So let's say if you're on the same level of expertise, like more or less, obviously, right? It's okay. But if somebody like really high up compared to you, for example, you will end up basically listening to him because you have no idea what's happening around, right? And that can be quite challenging. If the expertise in, let's say, in the team is more or less the same, you can basically split the roles, basically, right? You can say, hey, I'm trying to train efficient net, for example, family, using this and this. Like, okay, in that case, I will try to do like I will try out like, I don't know, like arc sign loss, basically, like, or something like that. So like something like another auxiliary loss, basically, to my network to see is it behave better or not. So there's but in that case, in order to split these roles, you have to be on the same page, right? That's why I'm thinking like having the same level of expertise is quite important, because otherwise it will be harder for you to be on the same page. So yeah, for deep learning, I definitely don't have a like exact strategy to do it. Just my thoughts basically from my experience. But I don't think of myself as an expert in computer vision in deep learning in general. I'm just start to learn that, but it's a nice field actually, so it's kind of fun.
And as you mentioned, great data scientists start to have a great intuition for building models and the complete pipeline. And that brings me to, I went through your profile and realized usually Kagglers prefer one style of competition, and you have actually medaled in NLP, computer vision, time series, sales related competition. So if you were to pick one, which is your favorite, and do you have any favorite battle stories from any of the competitions that you've competed in throughout these years?
Yeah, well, my favorite competitions these days actually is the deep learning competitions, and the reason why, because it's so much less time consuming compared to tabular data. It's like, I mean, it's definitely more power consuming, right?
Yeah.
So it's more like a calculation. I mean, the GPU consuming for sure, but your time as a human being, you're almost free to do whatever you want. Because, I mean, definitely, let's say if you start a competition, you spend first several days building a pipeline, looking at the database, if you're right, trying to understand how exactly you organize your training process. But as soon as this pipeline from the raw images to the submission is done, it's magically became, like almost like a zero time effort competition, because, you just hit the button, it trains for next 10 to 12 hours, for example, right? You basically, let's say during the night you made your training, right? At the morning you just woke up, look at the tensor board graph, plots, and like a change something basically, right? Like adjust some, change architecture, change, like a learning rate schedule or something, and run it again, and you're done basically. Or basically, or maybe continue to train. One of my favorite battle story was actually Airbus ship detection competition. It was my second. It was an object segmentation competition. It was my second object segmentation competition I participate in, and our winning solution, we end up on 16th place basically, but it's not very like a high achievable place. But what I like about this solution, it was a single model. It wasn't assembled, it wasn't nothing. It was a single model, almost with zero post-processing of the masks actually. And what the beauty of this model actually, it was, I ran the model for 100 epochs. Next morning I check it, run it for another 100 epochs. So basically, I trained for 700 epochs basically. It took me almost a week to train it on a 4 GPU machine, but that's it.
Okay.
I'll just continue to train the same model, like, over like again and again, like another 100 epochs, another 100 epochs, another 300 epochs. Well, it's still better, than the previous, like let's continue to train it. So that's it, It was,
That's awesome.
Yeah. So basically I literally spent like 5 minutes, just to just check the plots, change the amount of epochs to run it, to continue training, and that's it. I'm free for a whole day basically. It was like, well, actually that obviously it wasn't like that, because I had a second machine. I tried another different approaches, which never worked actually. This, it was a quite simple network. It was quite simple architecture. It was a quite simple architecture. It was quite simple pipeline, but it worked for some reason. Yeah, we end up on 16th place, just like by using this single model. Well, obviously, by saying single model, I mean it was basically, we have a 5 folds, right? And you just train the model using 5 folds, predict on the left on 4 folds, predict the remaining folds, and you repeat this 5 times. And as your final model, you just basically average the results of these 5 networks. So basically, that's something called bagging, basically, right? So yeah, that stabilizes your results for sure. But it's still the same approach, the same model, right? There's nothing. It's the same architecture. It's like nothing different.
That speaks to new Kagglers like me. This was my first mistake on Kaggle in my first competition, to try the biggest model out there and not try the simplest model out there. Sometimes even the simplest models can produce great results.
To support you, I did exactly the same mistake in one recent competition actually. it wasn't a competition for the medals. It was, I think it was like you have to classify the disease on the apple leaves. Like
Okay.
there's several diseases you can classify. And what I actually done, I just took my pipeline, a very complex pipeline from another competition. I just ran it for a week, and the result was extremely terrible. Basically, it was
Okay.
like it was not even close to anything basically. And I was like, oh my god, like, I mean, I'm almost like a single grandmaster who participated in this competition. Like everyone like else is just like like a students basically, because there is no points for this competition. And I was like, okay. So it was actually like a really good lesson to learn to start simple basically, because as soon as I started simple, I immediately realized what actually was wrong in my augmentation schema, which basically ruins the whole network. And network basically stops to learn after some point of time because it's never sure. And in some cases, the classification of this disease is supposed to be, it's a very fine-grained details basically. And by my augmentation, I completely remove these fine-grained details. So it's not able to tell actually the difference between the diseases just because there is no details left. So yeah, it was a good lesson learned actually. I still perform actually quite better on this competition. I end up on 20 something, but it was fun. At least I found my mistake. And instead of being like 400 something, I became actually 20 something.
A Kaggle novice would have failed 10 times, a grandmaster would have failed thousands of times, if I may augment the saying.
Yeah, you can say that actually. Like, and especially, I really failed on the Bengali. There's a Bengali grapheme recognition basically, right? So you have tons of different symbols basically. You have to classify them correctly. And I failed this competition. So basically what I do right now, I'm just building my own pipeline using the solution from the women teams. And I already found basically the reason why my solution actually failed. And I think that's the most important part of the Kaggle competition, is to learn on your mistakes. Because, let's say, why it's important actually. It's important because, let's say, if you compete on some competition, you spend hours, right, building the very best of your approach. I mean, you're not just doing like for nothing. You're trying to build as good as possible, as you think it can be good as possible. And if you're failing, right, it's immediately like you have a bug in your head, like saying like, yeah, why I'm failed. And that's how you actually go to the winning solutions, read the code and understand. And this knowledge will stay with you for a long time because you failed and now you know how to fix it. The whole human psychology actually works around, and actually the whole machine learning actually teaches us, you cannot learn from the success. You learn from the mistake. So all machine learning models, they basically learn from the mistakes. If you predict the class correctly, there is nothing to learn. It's learned already. The same actually goes for Kaggle competition in general. If you win the competition, it's like, you maybe even have no idea what exactly actually helped you to win it. If you lose it, you can compare your solution with a winning solution and understand what actually brought you to the place you actually end up with.
Similar to competitive sports, where even if you lose, you spend hours analyzing both your game and even the winner's game so that you can perform better next time.
Yeah, I mean, it is important to be among the losers, let's say, to learn winning solutions, because you have to see the both sides of the medal. If you're one of the winning, basically, like you're trying to avoid the survival bias, basically, right? If you learn only from success, it won't lead you to anything. You have to learn from the failures. Ideally, it should be other people's failures. In real life, it's your failures, because nobody learns from the other people's failures. It's an ideal world. We don't live in an ideal world. I'm trying to learn from other people's failures, and I'm never actually able to do that. But if I fail something, I'm definitely learn that that example by heart. And here's the same, right? If you have to try something yourself, right? Like, for example, let's say if somebody asked me about advice how to start competing on Kaggle, obviously it is a good idea to start from a previous competition, but you have to try it in them yourself without looking to the winning solution first. Because you need to have this example, you compare to best, let's say, right? Because if you learn just the best, you won't understand this difference, right? What exactly brought you to the best. because and even by reading winning solution, especially for tabular data, right? It's always important, at a winning solution you have like, okay, yeah, we built these features, and we built this model, we done, yeah, we won. But the question is actually the right question to answer, to ask and to find the answer. How exactly the team came up to these features? What's the thought process around it? Was a random search, and it could be actually just a random search. Who knows? If you're not a domain expert, that's potentially, it's obviously some sort of a random search because you have no idea about the domain and you don't have domain knowledge. But in general case, that's a very important question to answer. How exactly people came up to this solution, not to the solution itself. And obviously nobody will tell you that because not just because they're secretive, because at the end of the competition you have no idea. So much happened during the competition, so you just don't remember how exactly you came up to this. You can say it was a blind luck, and you will be right because I'm kind of got lucky to some extent. Yes, you just throw random stuff to your validation schema, and because your validation schema is good, something remained basically. But that's why I think it's important, even for past competition, is try to build your own solution and then compare your solution to the winning solution. That actually helps you to build, the understanding you will see the difference basically, right? And you can able to learn from this difference.
Certainly. What challenges do you look for today? You still, I would say, pretty active on Kaggle. You might disagree, but what challenges do you look for today on Kaggle?
I like computer vision competitions. I don't think I'm actually very good in NLP competitions, and I don't feel myself extremely motivated to compete on NLP competitions. Tabular data and time series is very time consuming, so I might be participating in them here and there, but most of the time I'm deep learning fascinates me basically, and I would like to continue compete on these type of competitions. And obviously something new like reinforcement learning for it would be really nice and fun to start.
Okay. Coming to your what you're also doing during your day, you're also Kaggle at day at S2, but you're the chief data scientist at S2.ai. What tasks are you working on, and how has Kaggle helped you at work? How has Kaggle helped you become a better data scientist?
So, well, Kaggle basically, it was a tremendous help in what I do in my day-to-day data science job, right? Because we at the company, we build an automatic machine learning framework, right? And that's basically, idea is quite simple, right? You just give us data, we will train a model for you. Obviously, the devil is in the details, right? There is a tons of complex and challenging problems in that, but it's still Kaggle helps you to, first of all, during my Kaggle experience, I built for myself a different libraries, right? I'm just continue to reuse on any tabular data competition, and that's actually helped me to define what I'm usually do for competition, right? What's feature transformations and engineering technique I can use almost in any on any tabular data set, right? Yes, it won't replace the domain expertise, right? If you have a specific domain expertise for the data, sure, but it's still it's a very good start, and you have a really generalizable approaches for any given data, and that's something I built for myself and for the company thanks to Kaggle. Okay. And Kaggle still helps us to be on the each of the research and each of the on the tool sets you can use, approaches, techniques, tips, and different tricks, right? It's still a vast a treasure trove basically for machine learning expert. So that's for me is Kaggle basically helped me to keep in shape and find something new for the products we build right now.
Talking about products, driverless AI is currently one of the answers by H2 to AutoML. What features, pun intended, did you contribute to, or were you involved while in the development of driverless?
So so basically the story starts almost 3 years ago, right, for Driverless AI. And Shri, our CEO, approached me and asked me like, hey, Dmitry, can you build, like let's say some sort of a general script, like, which the script you can use on any Kaggle tabular data, which gives you more or less good score, like, good prediction basically on a leaderboard. Not the best one, obviously, but something good, something reliable, something like achievable and more or less straightforward. I was like, sure, yeah, I can do that. I sat and I realized I have no idea how to do that. I never had actually, like a general script which runs for me. So I decided to build one, and that's how Driverless AI basically started. So for Driverless AI, I built a feature engineering part. So because at that moment of time, and actually even right now, more or less all parts of a machine learning model building is more or less optimized, can be automated, right? Like, for example, you can fine-tune features yourself, and that's great. Or you can just, run something like HyperOpt or Optima to find the best feature for you. From the other hand, the feature representation process wasn't automated at all, right? And I just said, okay, how can I automate that? Obviously, you can just, you can do like a random sync approach, right? You can basically take your data, take all the transformation possible, combine them together, get a huge data set, and work with that. But the data set becomes too huge, and it really becomes like, like tremendous. So I decided to design the system which actually find the most effective feature representation. And that's how Driverless AI started. It's based on a genetic algorithm space, or like in a nutshell. There is some tweaks in, here and there, but in like as a meta approach here, it was a genetic algorithm.
Okay.
And that's what I built, and I spent 3 months actually building that, and after 3 months we had the first version of Driverless AI, and we showed this first version on GTC conference, and it was pretty successful demonstration actually, and that's how it started. Obviously, I have to mention, like, it wasn't just me, obviously, right? There's tons of people involved, a very smart software engineer. So nowadays the tool is extremely robust. It can work on multi-nodes. So something I have no idea how to build basically, right? But it started basically as two files. One Python library which contains all transformations and the code, and one Jupyter notebook to show how it actually works. And yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see what it became these days.
You also hinted to how she approached you and how you made this, which allows me to transition into this question. What does the makers gonna make philosophy mean to you? What does it stand? What does it mean to you?
Well, in general, maybe that's, I would say it's taking responsibility for not just for the company, basically, for the company direction, because our CEO allows us to do what we think useful for the products, products or for the company in general. So nobody actually tells me what I'm supposed to do on my day-to-day. Like, it's not like we have a one-on-one meeting with Shri and he's like, hey, Dmitry, you want to do this, you're supposed to do this and that during this week. No, it's more like, how can I help the company? And as soon as you see some problem, you're just trying to solve it. If you feel yourself capable of solving it, you're just trying to solve it until it's solved. So that's basically, to my understanding, that's a philosophy of a maker's gonna make. Taking responsibility and get things done. Just in a nutshell, that's it. And and sometimes, I think get things done is a very nice way to say it, because in some cases it might be not the best solution even, right? But it's something instead of nothing. And that's how the whole process actually started. It's like, it's a very complex problem. What am I supposed to do? Like, just do something, and you will learn in the process how to do it better. Because, in machine learning, it's still, we don't have a strong, extremely strong theoretical foundation in machine learning compared to, let's say, to mathematics and physics in general. So a lot of things you just, like the whole deep learning space actually is a set of tips and tricks. It's like alchemy, basically, right? We don't have, again, this theoretical foundation that helps us to derive new insights, new models out of a strong theory. So, and that means you're required to have a lot of practical exercises on any approach you're trying to invent. Even so, you're solving problem, you see a lot of practical examples, and during the process, it's a very iterative process. You make solution, you're making your solution better and better and better. And that's again, I think that's a part of philosophy of makers gonna make. Just build it and improve it constantly.
If I may point out, I always mention on the show that Chai Time Data Science is a free podcast for the audience, ad-free podcast, but that is because H2O allows me to do this crazy idea of having chai and asking stupid questions to really smart people like you. And that's the reason that I can do this during the day and even run this as a service to the community. So that's really what the philosophy, as you mentioned, stands for.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, obviously we're both biased. We both work for H2O AI. So
Totally.
for our listeners,
Yeah. Now
we just have to make this disclaimer, right? Like, yeah, we both work for H2O AI, and we both think the company is great. We're biased, honestly.
Yeah, totally. But now coming back to the challenges you working on today, you enjoy working on tough problems. What problems are you currently solving at H2O, or what products are you currently focused on?
No, I don't feel myself enjoying working on hard problems. I'm actually extremely scared by tough problems. Like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do with that? But it's like, what motivates me is just to try to solve them because it's so much fun, right? I mean, obviously, you're trying to forget about, like, hey, it should be solved, because that might actually stress you out, right? Because you don't want to be stressed out. Don't want to be under the stress, right? You just want to be, okay, you know what, I need to think about something. I mean, I just need to play with it. I think, it's more or less like kids playing with the toys, right? It should be that motivation, that's something that opens creativity. Otherwise, if you're under the stress and somebody say hey, you're supposed to do that, in the next month or two, that can kill you completely, basically, and you won't be able to do anything except
Again, the
just
maker
applying
mindset, if I may.
Yeah. That basically, if you're under stress, you will be to do something, but it's mostly going to be some other people's solutions. We'll just take something that works because you have to be sure, and you just implement it, and you're done. You won't be able to experiment if you're under the stress. So it should be like a very a joyful, playful mood to do anything like that. Because and one of the back to the question. So one of the really complex and challenging problem. I'm not even sure I'm saying I'm working on it. I'm just trying to approach it from different angles without any success. So that's say, as of now, Driver AI works on the quite strict setup. You have a table. In each table, you have for each row on your table, you have defined target, and that's something we can do. But in general life, right, you in your database management system, you have tons of tables. So you have to design this data set first. And I'm just thinking about, is it any way of automatic or semi-automatic with human in a loop solution we can actually help you to design this table, more or less automatically. And it's doable, right? In a straightforward way, you can do it on, it's not a question, actually. It's very easy to do it in a straightforward way. But you will end up with basically your search space in terms of features engineered is going to be exploited. It's going to be almost it's tremendous, basically. So when I'm start thinking about, is there any effective way to, not just to create all features possible, for your, let's say, table, while joining different tables in your data set and in your database, creating your data set, but find the most important ones, right? The most useful one, which contains signal compared to just noise or whatever. And that's actually quite hard problem to solve.
A tough question. What do you think is one of the underrated aspects of AutoML?
Oh, it is a tough question, actually. So it's underrated. I think thanks to some companies and some marketing campaigns, data scientists in some cases think that AutoML is tend to replace them, right? So it's going to be better than a data scientist. It's not. No, just no. And the main reason why is because it's up to you to design a data set, because your data set basically represents the business problem you're trying to solve. And there's two major, extremely important pieces which we have no idea how to replace human for. It's the data set itself, like I explained before, right? Somebody has to design the data, and somebody has to define a validation schema. How exactly you're going to check your data, basically, right? And in most real life scenarios, your data has some strange time dependency or cohort dependency, and you have to make sure you actually consider that, and you have to tell the AutoML tool what you expect, how exactly you expect this validation to be performed, and your tool's supposed to allow you to do that. So to me, AutoML is mostly as a time saver, right? It's not like a replacement for anyone, but it's a time saver. It helps you to understand. So let's say you design your table you're trying to build your model on, and AutoML tool basically helps you to understand, is it the right data basically you put on this table? Like maybe you should add something more, like something else, like some more data basically, because in real life compared to Kaggle, you don't fine-tune your model to the third digit after the decimal point, right? You never do that. Nobody cares. If you want to improve your model, basically, you just add additional data sets, add additional data, basically, right? Like say if you have sales, you can add weather data, right? You can add CPI, like consumer indexes, different indexes basically to your data, different prices, the market behavior, if you want, something that basically make your data set richer. You don't actually just fine-tune model on the small data set. You're just trying to get more data, more and more data, do a feature selection maybe, right? And that's how you build your final model. And AutoML can help you because it's basically, instead of thinking about feature representation, you just put the data set into the AutoML tool, see the score. And if it's the score you would like to achieve, you already can use it. Or you can think of an AutoML tool as a baseline. Okay, my AutoML tool build me like an AUC of 19.2. Can I beat it basically? Then build 19.3. Let's say if I spend 2 hours or 2 days, for example. And in some cases you can, in some cases you cannot actually. I mean, obviously, if you spend 2 months or so, you will beat AutoML score for sure. Like that's not a question actually. It's but if you have these 2 months basically, but if you don't, you just you can use it as it is, and it's already good enough for most of the practical cases.
Like you said, it's really a tool.
Yeah, it's just a tool. It's just another tool in your tool in your tool belt. It's not going to replace you to any extent. It just helps you to build the model, understand the data, see the like a different pitfalls. So again, it's just a tool. And for professional data scientists, professional data scientists can use anything to his advantage, right? It can be AutoML, it can be like a new article basically in some scientific journal. It doesn't matter. It's still going to be advantage.
Right. So coming to the final question of the interview, if you were to give one best advice to Kaggle newbies in 2020, what would be the best advice?
I would do a kind of controversial advice actually, right? But I think having a good software skills is mandatory. Software engineering skills, yeah, because that's something you won't be able to learn on Kaggle, right? So anything else you definitely can be, but Kaggle code is Kaggle code. Nobody writes it. Honestly, my code is terrible actually. The code I write on Kaggle, I never show to anyone actually. It's just simply terrible. So that means that's the only skill you won't be able to learn on Kaggle. It's how to write a good code. So let's say if you spend some time just learn how to write a nice Python code, that's definitely going to be extremely helpful, because it can be helpful in two ways. First of all, you're gonna write a clean and nice code, which is always beneficial. No matter what you're going to do next in your life, if you connect your life with IT, it's definitely helpful. No questions asked, right? But also you will spend tons of time looking at other people's code, and if you have experience, and so basically the faster you can read other people's code, the better, right? So that's something that's definitely something you can learn outside of Kaggle. Also, maybe but that's something you can learn on Kaggle as well, right? So and don't hesitate to start actually competing. Don't do like me actually. Don't spend 6 months just learning something outside of Kaggle. Just start competing immediately. If you fail, you'll just learn tons of things in the process, right? And especially because it won't be actually important. But if you continue to do that, the next, let's say in first competition, you can be in, like, say, in top, like basically in a bottom list of the participants, not in the top one. But if you continue to do that, you find yourself, to your own surprise, like being in the top part of the list, not on the bottom one. It just requires, consistency and constant work. Basically, it's not
persistence, like how we started this interview.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So basically, it's all about just being constantly involved. Let's say now, in other words.
That's amazing advice. Before we end the call, Dmitry, I'll have your profiles linked in the description. If you'd like to mention any platforms where the audience can follow you.
I have a Twitter account actually. It's but I don't remember. I don't remember I think it's a DA Larko or something like that. So I think it's very easy to find me on Twitter. Let me check.
I'll have it linked in the show notes as well for anyone who.
Yeah, it's Dmitry Larko basically, and that's I don't have any. I do have a Facebook, but I tend to keep a Facebook to people I really know, in a physical world. But in LinkedIn, I usually connect to everyone, and you can follow me on Twitter. But I'm usually extremely silent on Twitter. So maybe there is no point of following me because I don't, don't publish too much actually to outside world.
Okay, awesome. Dmitry, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast and for all of your amazing insights that you shared.
Thank you for having me here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give it a review or feel free to shoot me a message. You can find all of the social media links in the description. If you like the show, please subscribe and tune in each week to Chai Time Data Science.